All right, welcome back to the Onebar and Lupagus show. I'm Onebar with Lupagus. We got a very special show, very special guest. If you've watched anything sports related, listen to anything sports related, you already know who the guy in the middle is. Jason Fitz, the man, Yahoo Sports, Fox Radio. Jason, man, thanks for hopping on. We appreciate you.
Man, I appreciate you guys having me, and I'm excited to talk to you guys because I think you guys hold the key to maybe the most interesting thing we've seen in years across the league at the quarterback position. Like it's just a wild time to be a Vikings fan.
It is beautiful. Let's get right in, right to the biggest talker. I've watched your show. I know exactly where you stand on the Sam Darnold Vikings. You wanted them to franchise it as far as the risk factor. There's no risk there. But now that it's done, do you think the Vikings dropped the bag? Did they mess up? Are we going to regret this?
Look, until we know exactly how good JJ can be, we don't know. And I think JJ can be great, by the way. JJ might turn out to be an absolute home run. We have to go back to what we thought of JJ coming into the draft, which was, man, as much as Harbaugh told the world he was the best college quarterback in history, he never really showed that because that's not that offense. So I think it's fair for everybody right now to sit here and say, okay, we think JJ can be good, but it's not like he was relied on to be the key at Michigan. I think that's fair to say. And now we have no idea what that looks like going into year two at this point because year one was basically lost. And y'all know this better than anybody. Remember what it was like when you were sitting there week in and week out and say, wait, who's our starting quarterback? That guy is still in the league. So to me, I'm risk averse. And I know that there's money that could be spent elsewhere. But I think the mistake here is that if there's even a slight step back, if JJ plays a little bit worse, I know we're all talking about the last two games of Sam Darnold last year, but let's talk about 14 wins. Not anybody can step in and get you 14 wins.
Mm-hmm.
So if I ran the Vikings, I would have kept him in the building. I'm cautious right now. I don't want to say it's a mistake because maybe JJ turns out to be great, but if he doesn't, or if there's injury concerns, man, you're kicking yourself because there's no better safety net than Sam Darnold.
Well, I got to ask you really quick. If let's say JJ, expectations, this is pretty much his rookie year coming up. If he just looks horrible, is Kwesi on the line here as far as this could cost him his job that soon?
I don't think it cost him his job because even if he's horrible, this is a Vikings team that's so talented, they'll win a lot of games. And by the way, I keep using, your coach as the example to everybody. When everybody around the league says, well, why would we want Sam Darnold? I guess my question is, do you not believe your coach is as good as Kevin O'Connell? Because last time I checked, KOC got them 14 wins again with Sam Darnold. So, for Giants fans and Raiders fans and Jets fans that are all sitting here looking at Sam Darnold, I would just say, if you believe your coach is competent as the Vikings coach, you should be able to win a lot of games. I think they'll win too many games for anybody's job to be on the line. But man, this is just going to hit different. You just never know where things are going to go throughout the course of a long regular season. If they're stuck with a starting quarterback nobody's heard of in the playoffs, then yeah, I think people are going to want to riot.
Jason, first of all, I love the retro Macho Man you got back there. That is absolutely fantastic.
I just noticed that.
I want it really bad. All right, so there's a lot of rumblings this week that despite not franchising Sam Darnold, they can still bring him back. Vikings said the same thing last year about Kirk Cousins. We all know how that went. Any truth to this or just nothing but smoke?
No, there's truth to wanting to work something out. I think what comes down to all of this for Sam is what does he want, right? So let's say that they want to find a middle-of-the-road deal for him, a 2-year deal that's $25-30 million a year. And by the way, I think it's time to look at the quarterback position as a net output of cost. So who cares? Between what you're paying JJ and what you're paying, obviously, at this point for Sam, you can afford – I know money can go elsewhere, but still, you can afford it. The one thing that is interesting is Sam's going to have to decide, okay, so let's say a team like the Giants or the Raiders, I'm a diehard Raiders fan. Everybody knows that. So let's say my beloved Raiders offer him $40 or $45 million a year. For what? To go play in a lesser situation where if everything breaks absolutely great, he's going to be the third best quarterback on the third best team in his own division if everything breaks right. I think that's why we saw Stafford flirt with bad teams and then look around and say, you know what? I can try and win a Super Bowl over here. So what really gets interesting to me is what is the market value for Sam Darnold? Because I keep hearing 40 or 45 makes sense. All right, you've already made $65 million in your life, roughly, according to the Google machine. So if you've already made $65 million, do you really want to roll it somewhere else where you might suddenly go back to being the Sam Darnold you were? I don't know. So I think this is a little bit of go see what your value is. Everybody's going to go see what the value is. And then Sam's going to have to decide what he's comfortable with.
So we've had a front row seat to Sam Darnold all year. It's been a wonderful ride. Everybody was just very excited what he brought to the table. As you mentioned, the Raiders, you being a fan, like, do you get excited of the thought of Sam Darnold coming there? Or are you just like, it's just because he was in Minnesota?
Well, I think the concept of Sam versus Aiden O'Connell, yeah, I'd be excited about that. I also think, guys, like, one thing we have to acknowledge is that I don't believe in a normal draft. I've covered the draft for 8 years professionally at this point. I don't believe in a normal draft. Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders, either one would be picked in the top half of the first round. I don't think Shedeur would usually be a first rounder. I talked to a couple of scouts over the course of the last week at Indy, and I had a couple of scouts tell me, yeah, he's a first round talent. Then I had a couple of scouts say, we've got him as a third round talent, right? So part of the challenge here is, again, if you're a quarterback starved team, any of them at the top of the draft this year, and you don't believe Cameron Shedeur is the answer, and personally, I don't, I'd rather take a flyer on Sam for 2 years, see if I can get any of that juice out of the squeeze, and then go best player available. Like right now, if I'm an NFL team, if I'm the Giants or the Raiders or the Jets, and I have a choice between Ashton Genty and Sam Darnold or Shedeur Sanders, I would take Sam and Ashton, and I would do that pretty comfortably. So I think part of the reason people are excited is, yes, again, he won 14 games. I don't want to gloss over that. And he won 14 games because he was playing at a really high level for most of that football. But the other side of it is wins above replacement, to go baseball on you for a second. Like, the war on Sam Darnold versus the rest of these free agents in the draft, I think, is pretty drastic.
Well, you mentioned running backs. Let's talk about our guy, Aaron Jones, who is up to be a free agent. I mean, his projections are anywhere from $5 to $7 million. What do you think the Vikings should do? Re-up on Aaron Jones, or look at this beautiful draft class that everybody loves? And are you as high on this running back class as everybody else?
Yeah, this running back class is stacked. It's the best running back class we've seen in years. And I mean, already people are trying to say Amari and Hampton, the kid out of North Carolina, could be even better than Ashton Genty. I think it's what flavor of ice cream you like the best. But I'll use ice cream as a second for this analogy, because I think running backs are like ice cream toppings. By themselves, they don't save any dessert. So, like, I watched Josh Jacobs lead the league in rushing in a year that the Raiders stunk. Like, Saquon didn't win any games with the Giants. Derrick Henry wasted most of his career with the Titans. What's the difference for those three players versus where they are now? When you go to a really good team, now the toppings really matter. Like, great toppings can be awesome on a great ice cream sundae. I would argue the roster of the Vikings combined with their coaching staff makes them a great sundae. So, yeah, I'm all in on overpaying a running back if I'm at the spot where I think, man, that running back can make the big difference. And frankly, if I'm the Vikings, I wouldn't mind doing both. I have no problem bringing back Aaron Jones and drafting somebody. There's going to be talent in the second round that's just going to be sitting there. Why not do both?
Why not?
Excited. Get me excited.
I like the toppings analogy. That was fantastic. Let's stick with free agency for a little bit. Kwesi's kind of gone middle of the road his first couple of years here as the GM. Do you think this is the year he makes a big free agent signing, spends that money for a Will Fries, Milton Williams, or even investing back in Byron Murphy to bring him back? Do you think he's going to be a big spender this year?
I think spending on your own is always the right thing to do at free agency. And you just mentioned three names that are all very good players. But are they three players that are going to take your team and suddenly push you over that? Like, are you better than the Eagles if you sign any of those three guys? I think part of what you have to look at here, and I use the Eagles because they're obviously the test now for the NFC. Part of what you got to look at here is not just the money you have to spend, but who's out there to spend it on. Once most of these free agents usually end up back with their team, and this year only two guys were franchised. That's the lowest since 94. Two guys were franchised this year. Why is that number so low? Because I think what you have is a lot of okay talent, pretty good talent that's making it to the free agent market. I think there's something to, hey, if the right splash is there, like if Murphy is worth the money to me. So go ahead. But for the most part, this thing that people hate, and I say this all the time, building your favorite football team is like your weight loss journey. So you got to do things. If you really want to lose weight and keep weight off for your entire life, you got to do things the right way. Means you got to draft smart year in and year out, over and over. So as much as we sit there, we look at everything Kwesi does, and we look at free agency money, I would say ultimately Vikings fans right now, your most important thing in the world is the draft. Are you nailing the draft? Because the Eagles went from good to great by having a Hall of Fame level offseason last year, in part because they nailed the draft, right? Like getting Quinyon Mitchell and getting Cooper DeJean out of that draft were home runs. Now, yes, they also got Saquon. They also Zach Braun turns around and has a huge resurgence. That's a oh my God, offseason. So for me, Kwesi's got to invest a little bit in free agency, but the draft is going to matter way more for the Vikings moving forward.
Jason, just going from a ice cream analogy to a weight loss analogy back to back.
Toying with our emotions.
You can tell food's always on my mind. All right, food is always on my mind.
You're talking draft, and you were on Gojo and Golick. I heard you mentioned something, and you said this isn't really the draft that teams will want to trade up for. The Vikings sitting at 24. You know, Vikings fans, we want to trade back. We want more picks. We want somebody to trade up with the Vikings at 24. Do you think when you get to that point in the first round, there could be guys that could fall where teams are like, all right, I'm going up and get him? Or are we going to be stuck at 24?
No, if you're a Vikings fan right now, you are rooting for Jackson Dart. You're rooting for Jackson Dart to get better, but not for Jackson Dart to get so good that he goes top 15. You don't want a Bo Nix rise. You want some sort of a Lamar rise out of this. And I think that's really possible, guys. By the way, I think Jackson's going to end up going somewhere in the first round. So the question is somewhere I would think back after the first round. So, you know, this is that age old, hey, you want to get the extra year on the contract, right? So if you want to get an extra year on the contract, you want to move up. You're going to be aggressive, particularly for a quarterback. Also, how the running backs play out will make a difference here. If the Vikings internally have a bunch of running backs that are stacked close together, then you could see a little bit of what the Bills did last year, as much as everybody hated it. The Bills were comfortable trading down into the second round because they didn't see a discernible difference between Xavier Worthy and Keon Mitchell. So they're like, hey, if I can pick up extra equity and move down, that is the right place to be in. I think for Vikings fans, when you pick, because you're right, by the way, this isn't the draft. This is a draft full of starters, not stars. So knowing that it's full of starters, not stars, when you really start to do the math and the grade between pick number 24 and pick number 50, I don't think there's going to be a huge difference. If I'm the Vikings, I want to move down. And that means, does somebody fall in love with the running back? Does somebody fall in love with the defensive tackle? Big draft there. Does somebody fall in love with Jackson Dart and want to move up to the bottom of the first round? That feels real to me. I think there's a much better chance of trading down there than there is in the top 10.
Right, earlier you mentioned Kevin O'Connell. He got his extension a couple weeks ago, maybe it was a month ago now. Nothing for Kwesi yet. Then we're at the combine. We heard Kwesi's missing interviews because he's sick. KOC's just nailing him. Is there anything going on here? I mean, Kwesi, this extension, is this going to happen? Or are they just, going to stick with Kevin O'Connell and maybe find a new GM in a couple years?
It's interesting because you've got a brilliant head coach with the organization. And I don't say that lightly. Like you have an advantage maker at the head coach position. As his legend continues to grow, and I think it will, much like Kyle Shanahan's has, you become sort of Teflon, right? Now, in the beginning, Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch were attached at the hip. As I'm interested to see what happens for San Francisco, who's now getting older. They're losing some big pieces. They're putting a lot more on Shanahan to be able to make the most of it. If he does, then Shanahan continues to rise. At some point, when coaches go through the rise that, KOC's going through right now, to me, that screams eventually you're the main guy. So Kwesi's got to be comfortable being Robin and not Batman, which not every NFL front office structure is comfortable with that. He's got to really become comfortable with that. And through this process of negotiation, he's got to be really comfortable in his own skin. I think it is telling when you get one guy done. Like anytime they don't announce both at the same time or in very close proximity to each other, there's a reason. Something is hampering one side or the other. One side in this process doesn't agree with the value in the other side. Otherwise, it would already be done. So I do think where there's smoke, there's fire for some of these contract situations. That being said, Kwesi is wildly respected in league circles. People genuinely believe he is not good. He is great at his job, and he is somebody that the league respects. I don't take that lightly either. I think it'll get done, but I'm with you. The longer that you end up with this sort of chasm between the two, it makes me wonder.
I got to tell you, this is fantastic having you on. A couple quickies to finish it out, but really appreciate the time. Busy dude, love your stuff. What do you think of the Bears' moves on the O-line quick so far?
Yeah, I think the Bears are doing what they can do. They're going out and they're aggressively getting offensive line help. But also, let's be real. I do not believe there are 32 starting caliber left tackles in the NFL, for example. I think, fat guys are at a premium right now. And so you've got a team in Kansas City that only had one, they have an all-pro and Trey Smith that they decided to franchise, which is huge for them, obviously. But then they're letting Tooney just walk out the door. And they have a terrible offensive line. So to me, that's I don't believe Andy Reid is suddenly stupid at football. So they're letting him walk out the door for a 5th round draft pick. That says something. And then Flip side of that is the Rams, same thing. Like the Rams don't have a young quarterback, and they're letting their offensive line get sort of ripped apart. Now, maybe they trust their depth, or maybe they just realize that those guys aren't really worth it. I think the Bears are doing the best they can to put better in front of Caleb. That's the first part of a long process for them. I respect the moves for Chicago, but man, anytime guys at that age are being moved around, it makes me a little bit curious.
Final, you kind of mentioned it, your love for Kevin O'Connell. But is there something to it? Like at the end of the games, he's shaking hands with he's always hitting up the young quarterbacks, and everybody in the league just seems to love this guy. I mean, is there something to it where guys would come to Minnesota strictly because of Kevin O'Connell, putting money aside?
1,000%. Look, if you talk to guys in the league, they'll tell you that money is the main factor. Like I'll never forget when I asked Calais Campbell years ago why he signed with the Jags. I asked him, like, did you look at film? Did you look at the other offensive line? And Calais was like, no, I looked at the contract offer and it was the biggest, so I took it. I think, okay, so let's set that aside. From the rest of it, now you start to look at those NFLPA report cards, which I think are far more substantial. Like, we talk about them for a day, but they're meaningful. Like, well, I had a player tell me the most important part of those report cards isn't that we're putting stuff out in public. It's that the public gets to see what we're saying when no one's around. So the NFLPA report cards matter. Like, it tells you what the team conversations like are with players. And when you have a guy that is viewed as the sort of person that can make the most of whatever you do, man, I think that's a difference maker. So, yeah, if you're a quarterback that's looking for redemption, a second chance, especially because there's a commonality in language now for a bunch of the Shanahan tree, for a bunch of the McVay tree, you're talking about guys that all speak the same language. So now any quarterback that's played in any of those systems, yeah, like, hell yes. If you're Kirk Cousins and you're trying to figure out where to play, like, I realize that nobody wants Kirk Cousins back in Minnesota, but Kirk would probably gladly be back in, you know what I mean? Like, that's what happens. If you're a quarterback that turns around and you're like, well, you know what? I speak that language, so I know that offense, and I can work with a guy that's always going to put me in the best position possible. Heck yes, I want to play there. So I think we have to remember that. We also have to remember that Sam Darnold wasn't an accident. Systems matter for players. We label players busts all the time. We need to start holding organizations accountable for the fact that they bust players as often as players bust themselves.
Fitzy, ended on a hot note, man. That's beautiful. You've spoken with some of the best in sports, and you take the time to talk to a couple of weirdos like us talking Vikings. Man, we appreciate it so damn much, man. We'll be tuning in Yahoo Sports, Fox Sports Radio, and all the shows you're on, man. We greatly appreciate it.
Always hit me up anytime. I had a blast. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, man.